踏入1990年咧，東歐巨變嘅浪潮咧係進一步發展。大家都知道咧，喺1989年嘅年尾咧，柏林圍牆倒冧，象徵住咧就係東歐巨變嘅開始。咁喺1990年嘅時候咧，好多國家嘅人民咧希望咧就係進一步推翻共產黨嘅統治，佢哋希望修改憲法，嚟一次正式嘅選舉，然後咧就係建立一個真真正正嘅民主嘅體制。嗱，呢一連串嘅變化咧係嚟得好快嘅，而教宗咧亦都覺得非常之驚訝，竟然咧就係蘇聯東歐嘅崩潰咧嗰個速度咧係咁快。但係佢肯定咧就係教會喺推動東歐同埋蘇聯變革，同埋另一方面就係話推動嗰個自由化嗰方面咧係起到一個非常之重大嘅作用。嗱，我哋都知道咧就係教宗若望保禄二世咧，從來都係批判呢個不人道嘅社會主義制度。過去喺波蘭做大主教嘅時候係咁樣，佢做教宗之後咧亦都係一樣。而佢喺推動呢個東歐巨變嘅過程裏邊咧，可以講話係扮演一個即係舉足輕重嘅角色。但而家佢又提醒我哋，就係話有咗自由啦，係咪就係萬事大吉呢？佢話唔係，有咗自由之後咧，我哋都要繼續反省人類前途嘅嗰個發展方向。無論點都好咧，1990年咧係象徵住東西對壘嘅結束。從此以後咧，就係東西方就唔再分成東西方，而係咧大家就朝住一個一體化嘅歐洲向前進。好啦，喺呢一年裏邊咧，教宗若望保禄二世咧再次接見戈爾巴喬夫。喺呢一次會面裏邊咧，佢完全肯定戈爾巴喬夫對東歐巨變所做嘅貢獻。同樣，教宗咧亦都訪問咗捷克，會見咗新當選嘅總統哈維爾。而哈維爾總統咧過去係一個好出名嘅異見分子，曾經咧就係被捷克共產黨咧係監禁過嘅。嗱，呢一年咧亦都象徵住梵蒂岡同埋一啲共產國家關係嘅恢復。烏克蘭咧其中有10位地下主教咧喺呢一年咧就獲准正式訪問梵蒂岡，同埋咧佢哋有機會咧同一啲國外嘅烏克蘭主教會面。嗱，呢個象徵咧烏克蘭咧就係喺呢個問題上邊，即係話喺宗教自由嗰方面咧，係邁出咗好重要嘅一步，因為過去呢啲地下主教咧就唔可能令到即係唔可能咧就係俾共產黨知道佢哋嘅存在。同樣道理喺越南亦都係一樣。越南雖然係一個社會主義國家，但係喺1990年咧，亦都容許佢哋嘅21個主教咧訪問梵蒂岡，得到呢個教宗嘅祝福。呢個標誌住咧就係越南同埋梵蒂岡關係嘅正常化。但係喺佢裏邊咧亦都提到，就係話其實梵蒂岡亦都希望同樣嘅正常化咧能夠同中國發生，但係咧當然咧呢個問題咧就冇辦法喺短時間裏邊咧解決。喺1990年咧，教宗最關心嘅另外一個問題咧，我相信唔使我講大家都知啊，就係波斯灣戰爭馬上要爆發。喺嗰年嘅夏天，伊拉克咧喺侯賽因嘅領導底下咧就侵佔咗科威特，然後為咗即係恢復科威特呢一個國家咧，美國咧就係挺身而出，喺聯合國裏邊咧就通過連串嘅議案，希望咧最終咧伊拉克咧就離開科威特。嗱，呢個戰爭雖然喺90年咧就仲未爆發，但係已經係迫在眉睫。教宗唔希望睇到戰爭，佢希望人與人之間同埋國與國之間能夠達至諒解同埋和平。喺呢一套片裏邊咧，仲有2點係值得攞出嚟講一講嘅。第一點咧就係、其實喺以後嘅百年通諭嗰度，教宗亦都提到過嘅，就係話而家社會主義馬上就要結束啦。但係呢一個咧並唔係象徵住資本主義嘅全面勝利。佢認為資本主義咧其實亦都存在住好多嘅問題。佢喺呢個時候咧，亦都開始提出嚟啦。第二點咧，就涉及意大利南部嘅罪惡活動。教宗喺訪問意大利南部嘅時候咧，特別對嗰3000個公務員咧提醒佢哋，意大利南部嘅非法罪案活動咧係非常之猖獗。咁呢個當然同當地嘅黑社會咧好有關係。佢特別提醒佢哋咧，應該要好好地對付呢啲黑社會，從而促進社會嘅安寧同埋和諧。
Events were taking on the proportions of a real upheaval, and John Paul II was unable to contain his astonishment over the developments of 1989. Even he, who had been their patient moral instigator, was unable to imagine that the evil empire, as the system of atheist regimes was called, could collapse into ruins. The Pope gave his first assessment of this unexpected upheaval to 118 ambassadors accredited to the Vatican for the traditional New Year audience. His sense of wonder, emotion, and thankfulness to Providence are well reflected in a speech that in parts became almost poetic.
The unquenchable thirst for liberty manifested by different peoples has accelerated the evolution of events, brought down the walls and opened the doors. Events are taking on the proportions of a real upheaval. As you will undoubtedly have noted, the starting point or the meeting point has often been a church.
In words charged with emotion, the Pope praised the peaceful uprising of peoples who had undertaken that pilgrimage towards freedom, without, however, forgetting the politicians who made it possible, giving implicit recognition of Gorbachev's role. In the early months of 1990, the Pope, who had come from a communist bloc country, often confronted the self-styled political scientific systems and revolutionary myths with the historic consequences of their tragic utopian ideas that had failed so miserably. He made a tough indictment of communism, which he labelled as inhuman totalitarianism during the audience that he held at the Papal Council for Culture. But even in this case, his condemnation was combined with a call for prudence, wise meditation, and bold planning for the new balance that was emerging between East and West and North and South. The year 1990 marked the completion of the Vatican's Eastern policy and its full emergence on the major international stage. Its diplomatic activities, which might in the past have seemed elitist and marginal, became a major element in its pastoral design following the events of 1989. Its international political choices revolved around peace and the development of peoples, taking the Second Vatican Council as its point of reference with a fresh expression of the mystery of the Church and of its mission in the world. Throughout the year, the Vatican kept its focus on Moscow and openly supported Gorbachev's perestroika policy, even when the crisis broke out in Lithuania, the only Soviet republic with a Catholic majority. While flying from Rome to the island of Capo Verde on the 25th of January, John Paul II revealed that during the historic audience of the 1st of December 1989, Gorbachev had asked him to pray for perestroika. For the whole year, the Vatican maintained this focus, not without trepidation, hoping for a positive outcome of the Kremlin leader's policy. It was truly extraordinary, as a sign of the times. Even a year earlier, no one could ever have imagined such a change, that the Vatican would be working for the success of the Kremlin's policy. The audience with Gorbachev on the 18th of November at the Vatican did not have the same historical impact as the first one, but concluded in mutual satisfaction, with a highly positive year as regards official links between the USSR and the Vatican, opening the way for a third meeting, which all thought it fitting to hold at the Kremlin, in the context of a papal visit to Moscow. However, this hope remained unfulfilled because the USSR came to an end, and because of the opposition of the Orthodox Patriarch of Moscow. The attention the Pope gave to the events of 1989 and 1990 was not just a matter of diplomatic, political assessment, but in keeping with John Paul II's outlook, was always transformed into prayer. From the highest peak of the continent, the Pope blessed and prayed for a free and united Europe. The Pope and the peoples of Europe were able to experience the full force of change even through their emotions, and no event of the year proved better for this than the high-profile two-day visit that he made to Czechoslovakia on the 21st and 22nd of April. The scene was Prague, where the communist regime had been most narrow-minded and harsh, when 20 years earlier the hopes of socialism with a human face had been crushed by Soviet tanks. Václav Havel, the dissident playwright who had often been imprisoned by the communist regime and who was now the first president of reborn Czechoslovakia, just 5 months after the timely Velvet Revolution, expressed the feelings of his countrymen well when he greeted the Slavic Pope at the airport. At his side was the 90-year-old Cardinal František Tomášek, symbol of the resistance of the Czech Church. The nightmare was over. The castle was open, and the Bishop of Rome made this announcement from Prague Castle, speaking to intellectuals.
In a certain sense, Czechoslovakia is today returning to Europe. It has a precise role and an important mission as a spiritual crossroads in the continent, a bridge between West and East.
Prague gave its guest a triumphant welcome, with more than 1 million people participating in the communion service at Liedna Park, which had been the scene of mass gatherings against the regime the previous November. Even those who were not Catholics applauded him as an architect of the new Europe. Never before, as in these early months of 1990, had a pope found himself acting as guide for so many people in search of liberty, following a plan of Christian humanism. Never as now had a pope preached at the spiritual crossroads of Europe. Freedom brought the opportunity for the Vatican to fill bishops' posts in the former Soviet bloc that had been vacant for years, and enabled national bishops to speak out and resume their work. The most significant event of this rebirth of Eastern European episcopacies was the meeting in Rome from 25th to 26th June in the presence of the Pope of 10 Ukrainian bishops who had been undercover in their country for many years, and 18 of their colleagues who had emigrated. As for Catholic communities still under communist regimes, 1990 marked a crack in the ice of relations with Vietnam. For the first time since the outbreak of the war between North and South, the Hanoi government permitted a collegial visit to the Pope by 21 bishops belonging to the Episcopal Conference. There was, however, no such change in links with Communist China, which again made accusations against the Vatican and persecuted Catholics faithful to the Pope, bringing back repressive measures that had been in force for 40 years but had been applied less often in recent times. On August the 6th, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. The strong threats of armed intervention made by certain countries, led by the USA, under the aegis of the United Nations, forced the Pope to describe the situation in the Persian Gulf on the 26th of August, only 3 weeks after the invasion, as truly worrying.
Giorno del Signore, sento anche il dovere di invitarvi a pregare per la pace nel Golfo Persico, dove ultimamente si è venuta a creare una situazione veramente preoccupante. In realtà siamo stati testimoni di gravi violazioni del diritto internazionale, della Carta dell'Organizzazione delle Nazioni Unite, come dei principi di etica che devono presiedere alla convivenza tra i popoli. La diffidenza degli uni verso gli altri va drammaticamente aumentando e l'ordine internazionale, edificato a prezzo di tanti sforzi e del sacrificio di tante vite umane, è gravemente minacciato.
At Christmas, speaking to a vast audience in an address televised worldwide and using words that recalled those of Pius XII in 1939, John Paul II shouted,
La luce di Cristo è con le nazioni tormentate del Medio Oriente, per l'area del Golfo trepidanti aspettiamo il dilegarsi della minaccia delle armi. Si persuadano i responsabili che la guerra è avventura senza ritorno. Con la ragione, con la pazienza, con il dialogo, nel rispetto dei diritti inalienabili dei popoli, delle genti, è possibile individuare e percorrere le strade dell'intesa della pace.
The Pope, who had helped to bring down the Berlin Wall, was now back in his more customary role as the unheeded prophet of peace, just as John Paul II remained unheeded in his denunciations, his appeals, his pleas and condemnations on behalf of Africa. 9 months later, John Paul II resumed these entreaties, this time from Central Africa. In Mwanza, in Tanzania, he proved disheartened and pessimistic about the failure of the development of African peoples that had been expected to accompany their emergence from colonialism.
When they obtained independence, many developing countries were optimistic about the future, only to discover that their hopes of development today seem very far from being realized.
That failure is obvious, the Pope added, in the dramatic effort to break the indifference of the West. It was therefore with some embarrassment that John Paul II inaugurated the Church of St. Peter of the Savannah, a vast basilica that had cost more than 200 billion lira. A personal gift of the president and father figure of the Ivory Coast, Félix Houphouët-Boigny. The Pope's second journey to Mexico, which he made in May, following his first in January 1979, will have its place in history not so much because it brought to an end the strange situation of state opposition to the clergy, contrasting with the Catholic faith of 95% of Mexicans, but rather because of the lesson in economics that the Pope gave to Mexican businessmen in Durango. His address offered a foretaste of the central theme of the Centésimos Annus. The collapse of real socialism does not mean the victory and validity of capitalist systems. In the grandiose Ricardo Castro Theatre in the center of Durango, the Pope spoke not just to Mexican businessmen, but to the whole of Latin America.
The events of recent history have sometimes been interpreted in a superficial way, as the triumph or failure of one system in relation to another. In other words, as the triumph of the free capitalist system.
Of the 6 pastoral visits carried out by the Pope in 1990, the one he made to Naples and Campania in November deserves recognition as one of the most important and richest in teachings that he has ever conducted in Italy, because of the wide range of subjects and the severity of the papal warnings. During an unprecedented meeting in the capital of the South with 3,000 civil servants in the great Aeritaria hangar at Capodimonte, the Pope issued his most drastic denunciation.
Sono motivo di grave preoccupazione gli attentati alla sicurezza delle persone, alla vita delle comunità internazionali in cui si sono radicate e si espandono le organizzazioni criminali che, come la Camorra, trovano in questo territorio un campo fertile. La non infrequente violazione dei principi che dovrebbero informare le relazioni sociali, la prevalenza di particolarismi, l'illegalità diffusa.
The target of his accusation was the excessive role of politics that often profoundly disrupt social life. On the 1st of December 1990, yet another 1st of December following the 1989 audience with Gorbachev, John Paul II turned an important page in his period in office. 76-year-old Cardinal Agostino Casaroli had stepped down as Secretary of State after 11 years in office, having exceeded the age limit. The Pope replaced him with 63-year-old Archbishop Angelo Sodano from Asti, who had been Secretary of the Department of Relations between the Vatican and other states since July 1988. Thus ended Casaroli's diplomatic era, marked by the Vatican's Eastern policy, and a new policy began based on continuity but with some change. The continuity lay in the facts, as Sodano had been Casaroli's pupil, while the change was implicit in their different characters and backgrounds. The most important ecclesiastical event of 1990 was the 8th Ordinary General Assembly of the Bishops' Synod, dealing with the training of priests in current circumstances. After listening for a month, the Pope intervened during the concluding meeting to set the principles on the main subjects that had been discussed by the 230 Synod Fathers as regards training of priests. He did not forget to criticize some of the mass media for supporting and assisting the systematic propaganda that is hostile to the celibacy of priests. There were numerous minor events during this 13th year of his term in office. One significant theme among many was Karol Wojtyła's attitude to sport. He did not pass up opportunities to kick a football and to call himself a sportsman. This happened on the 9th of June, the inaugural day of the 1990 World Cup in Italy, while he was visiting the Roman parish of Colle Verde. While meeting young people, the Pope revealed that his aides had reminded him that the World Cup opening match was about to begin and commented with a smile,
The Pope should not even attempt to compete with this national duty to be in front of the television. I now wish you farewell to avoid clashing with Italian football.
In his love of nature and of physical exercise, Karol Wojtyła shows that he is in touch with the modern way of life and that he is a normal human being, as well as universal pastor of the church.
睇完呢套片之後呢，我哋發覺到踏入1990年呢，東歐巨變已經開始有一啲初步嘅成果。其中最重要嘅就係人民開始享受到自由。而自由裏邊咧，當然以宗教自由咧，對東歐人嚟講咧係非常之重要嘅。本來好多地下教會咧，而家唔再匿埋喺地下啦，而家可以出嚟啦。可以講話咧，天主教會嘅活動咧喺呢啲國家裏邊咧係開始正常化啦。喺片裏邊咧提到烏克蘭有10個地下主教，而家呢10個地下主教咧，竟然可以去到梵蒂岡同埋幾個國外嘅主教會面。嗱，呢個象徵住咧烏克蘭同梵蒂岡嘅關係正常化。同樣，越南係一個共產黨統治嘅國家，但係佢亦都容許佢哋有一個主教咧訪問梵蒂岡。換句話講咧，就係天主教會喺越南嘅境況咧，顯然咧係比1990年之前咧就會係好好多啦。從呢一套戲亦都可以睇到咧，教宗對資本主義社會嘅發展咧係非常之關心嘅。佢唔認為資本主義社會咧就係萬事大吉。實際上，冇錯，每人喺資本主義社會裏邊咧有好多自由，但係由於不平等、不公義嘅事情咧依然係存在，所以咧佢對資本主義社會咧依然係持住一個批判嘅態度。資本主義基本上係一個